All right, well, I think people can continue to join as the meeting gets going, but I would like to thank those of you who are joining us already for tuning in to our Affordable Housing Plan Public Workshop. My name is Catherine Kramer. I'm the town planner for Farmington, and I'm in the conference room with some colleagues that will be here presenting about this Affordable Housing Plan process, as well as some other individuals on the line, including consultants from SLR who are assisting us, the town of Farmington, with the development of the Affordable Housing Plan. So we can click to the next slide and lead you through tonight's agenda. So the objective of tonight's meeting is to provide an introduction and background on this process of developing an affordable housing plan for Farmington, and to walk the public through our housing needs assessments and some of the community survey results that we have been conducting for the last month. And then ultimately, the role of the public tonight is to provide us with input on potential affordable housing strategies. And we hope to walk you through these strategies, some information on them, and other case studies, and have an opportunity to receive feedback from the public on different preferences that may exist within the community and thoughts on these. If you have any questions or comments, please type them into the Q&A feature in the chat. We will work to bring those together and answer as many questions as we can at the end of the meeting. And if there are things that aren't going to be able to be answered on this meeting, we will work on updating our website with more information so that the questions that are out in the public get answered on our website. You can also email any comments or questions to my email. It's kramerk@farmington-ct.org, and I would be happy to bring those together and answer any questions. So, next slide. So yeah, getting going with the introduction and background. This plan is an opportunity to create an affordable housing plan that reflects the values and priorities of Farmington. Our goal and objective here is to create something that represents this community. So the Affordable Housing Plan is required by state statute 830J to create and maintain an affordable housing plan every 5 years. So the goal is to have a bottom-up approach for how to increase our affordable housing supply within Connecticut, and it is something that every municipality is required to do. The town of Farmington received a $15,000 grant from the Department of Housing to help us develop this affordable housing plan, which is why we have our great team members on this project, Pat Gallagher and Liz Esposito, helping us with this plan. And so I'll turn it over to Pat, who can describe this process a little bit more detail.
Thanks, Catherine. So just a little bit more background on the state statutes. Back in 2018, a new state statute was passed requiring towns to create an affordable housing plan every 5 years. The initial statute was fairly vague. It didn't really give a lot of specificity in terms of what the state was looking for, other than that the plan should identify how the town intends to increase the number of affordable housing units, and then setting some parameters around how often the plan needs to be updated, and recommendations for public participation. Next slide, please, Liz. Back in December, the state finally released a guidance document providing some more specific information that they're looking for in these affordable housing plans. And these are the components that we'll be using as we develop the town of Farmington's affordable housing plan. The first part is a community value statement. So this process is really meant to be a conversation with the community about what makes the town great and how affordable housing can fit within that parameter. We want to go over a history of affordable housing in your town, have some data-driven needs assessment, look at your land use and zoning procedures, and then ultimately end with some goals and actions to help increase the number of affordable units in Farmington. So right now, we've completed really the first 4 bullets. We're starting to pivot towards those goals and actions, and your input tonight will help provide us some feedback in terms of the pulse of the community. I'll start with this and then pass it over to Nancy. So affordable housing is not something new in Farmington. The table on the right shows the percentage of affordable housing in the Farmington Valley. As you can see, the town of Farmington has a higher percentage of affordable housing compared to all of your neighboring communities. Now, what is affordable housing? When we're talking about it tonight, we're talking about what's called protected affordable housing. So protected affordable housing either is subsidized through government subsidies, typically through the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or has a deed restriction which protects its affordability even if a unit is sold or vacated. And so when we look at the percentage of affordable housing, both in Farmington and your neighboring communities, we're talking about those protected units. And I'll pass it over to Nancy to give a little more background on the history of affordable housing in Farmington and some of the programs that you operate today.
Perfect. Good evening, everyone. I'm Nancy Parent, the Director of the Housing Authority. The Housing Authority was actually created by an ordinance, ordinance number 65 in 1972. And the Housing Authority's responsibility as far as affordable housing is the programmatic responsibility. So we provide the oversight to the programs, we do eligibility determination, and then we serve as a landlord in a few different areas as well. So there's 4 specific programs that we oversee. In 1975, we built our first elderly complex. It is called Maple Village, and it is in Unionville. It started as a 40-unit elderly-only complex, but then in the late 90s, some of the state regulations changed, and it became disabled, an elderly complex, and it still is there today, the 40 units, a mixture of both elderly and disabled. And all the tenants there pay 30% of their monthly income towards rent. The second, in the late 70s, we started doing the Section 8 program, which is a federal program, and people receive a voucher to find housing anywhere in the town that they want to live. So it's scattered throughout our town, and they also pay 30% of their adjusted income towards rent. And at this time, we have 90 vouchers throughout our town of both Farmington and Unionville. We also have a town-owned rental program. We only have 8 units, but they are 30 to 50% below the fair market rent. So we're really targeting people with lower to moderate income. And then the last program is called our Cooperative Home Ownership Program. And that is to really increase home ownership from people with low to moderate income to make it affordable. And what happens is when someone who qualifies is looking for a home, the town would actually buy the land out from under the home, thereby making the amount that they would mortgage much less. For example, if a piece of property is $200,000 and the land is $100,000, the individual who would qualify would only be mortgaging $100,000. And what happens with that is that there is some resale restriction, so that will always remain in the affordable housing arena, that we keep it that way. So those are the 4 programs that we provide, and I think later on in the presentation we'll talk a little bit more about the cooperative home ownership.
Great. Thanks, Nancy. And Liz, if you can go to the next slide. So as Nancy mentioned, there's a lot of programs that the town administers and operates. However, there's also a lot of private affordable housing with the community, including many units that are in mixed income developments. And these 4 images here just give some examples of what affordable housing looks like in your community. All of these projects, many of these projects are mixed income. So that means there are affordable units that meet that state definition of affordable housing mixed in with market rate. And as you can see, it can come in of a range of different styles, both architectural, sizes, and densities. So ranging from duplexes to your more traditional apartment buildings. All right, so now I'll give a brief overview of our housing needs assessment, looking at some of the trends we're seeing in the community. So since 2010, Farmington's population has grown very slowly by just over 150 residents. And this is very similar to what we've seen in other communities in Connecticut. Many communities are built out, which means that most developable land has already been developed, and there's not a lot of vacant land that can support new housing. And the new housing is primarily through smaller infill projects. The town is also aging. Over the last 10 years, there's been a growth in the share of population over age 65. However, we're also seeing a growth in the young adult population. That's folks between age 20 and 34. And that's really indicating that we're starting to see that generational housing turnover. Some households that maybe bought into the community back in the 70s and 80s and had their kids go through the school system, maybe reaching the point where they're looking to downsize and then selling their home to a young family with children in tow, and really gravitating towards the ample family housing stock that Farmington has. One interesting trend was looking at household size within the community. About 63% of your households are 1 or 2 person households. And again, that reflects a lot of older householders who may have children that have aged out and no longer live within the community. Looking at the town's housing stock, you do have a very diverse housing stock for a suburban community, a larger share of renter occupied units than many of your neighboring towns in the Farmington Valley. You also do have a diverse range of price points. While Farmington is a higher income community, you do offer a range of different housing choices, from condos to starter homes to larger single family homes. However, like most communities in the state, it's tough to provide those units at the most affordable price points for those low income families, just from the market economics of it. Getting into some of our housing market trends, the chart on top shows permit activity in Farmington since 2001. What you can see is that permit activity has really been stable over the last 12 years or so, averaging just under 40 new units per year since 2015. And that's down significantly from the early to mid 2000s before the Great Recession, when there was a lot more housing development and new units being built. One of the interesting trends that we've seen across the state as a result of the pandemic is a very strong single family market, as folks look to move to suburban communities and get more space, coupled with the new flexibility to work from home, has led to a real resurgence in sales and sale prices in a lot of suburban communities in Greater Hartford and throughout the state. And this is really indicative of high demand as well as a low inventory. And as sale prices get pushed up, that may impact what we call our naturally affordable units in Farmington that are affordable to low-income families but don't have those same restrictions that the protected affordable units have. So getting into our needs assessment, one of the key indicators that we look at is called cost burden. So that tabulates the number of households that spend greater than 30% of their household income on housing. Those households are considered cost burdened. And when a household is cost burdened, they may have difficulty affording other expenses such as transportation, medical care, and food. And so these households may have to rely on other forms of social assistance to meet their daily needs. So some of the populations in Farmington with disproportionate cost burdens and housing needs include low-income households, especially those that make less than 50% of our area median income. Senior households have a higher share of cost burden than other age groups. Persons with disabilities, young adult households under 35, renters, and single individuals. And single individuals is more limited by the fact that they only have one income. Many family households have 2 or more incomes, thus making more types of housing within reach. So we looked at and relied on a data set published by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, which identifies the number of low-income households within your community. And despite the perception of Farmington being a affluent community, there is still significant need. 28% of your total population meets the HUD definition of low income by making less than 80% of the area median income, and could be eligible for various affordable housing programs. And out of these groups, over 2/3 are cost burdened and spend more than 30% of their household income on housing. And so I think this is a really important component of your affordable housing plan, is that this is really providing housing for your current residents who do have substantial housing needs. So when we look at our needs, we compare that to the number of protected affordable units. Getting back to that state definition, an affordable housing unit is only categorized as affordable when it has those restrictions in place that protect it either for a set period of time or in perpetuity. So the town has 881 protected units as of 2020, just under 8% of your total housing stock. And not all of these units are protected forever. You have several developments that were built back in the 80s and 90s that had 30 or 40-year deed restrictions. And then once those restrictions expire, they'll no longer count towards your state definition of affordable, even though they may remain affordable in a natural sense. Some other interesting facts that we uncovered when we looked at our housing needs is looking at your waiting list for the units and vouchers operated by the Housing Authority. Both of those programs have multi-year waiting lists, indicating that there is a significant demand and that demand outweighs supply. We looked at your existing housing stock beyond your protected affordable units, and you do have a significant number of what we call those naturally occurring affordable units, especially for families making between 50% and 80% of area median income. However, you lack the units affordable to the lowest income households, those that make less than 50% of area median income, and that's across all household sizes and types. And that's a common problem throughout the state. Again, it comes down to the market economics. It's difficult to build a unit without a government subsidy that can support a very low income household or family. Liz, you want to take us through the community survey results?
Sure, thanks, Pat. So I hope that everyone on this call took this survey. It ran during the beginning of the month up until last week. We got 315 responses. Most of our respondents were long-term residents, and 87% of them own their own home. 84% lived in a single-family home. But only 46% of respondents live in a 1 or 2 person household. So this was much lower than your actual demographics. So that may be impacting the results we're seeing, but we still have some really important trends that we saw in the data. So we asked what brought people to Farmington, why did they stay here, what makes it a great place to live, and the top 3 responses by far were the school system, the cost of living, the taxes, and the location and commute. So I have a selection of some of those responses on the left there. Just people really love this community, and through this plan we can support all the things that people love about Farmington. So when we asked about housing needs, a little more than half of the respondents were aware of affordable housing in the community, and they were more likely to be aware of protected affordable units rather than naturally occurring affordable ones, which is no surprise. But only 38% of respondents know someone who struggles with housing costs in town. So this may also sway the results a little bit. If you don't personally know someone who is struggling, then maybe you don't think it's an issue, but that's why we have the data analysis. So we also asked about housing choices. Was there not enough, too much, or the right amount of different types of housing? So just over 50% said there wasn't enough housing for young adults. That was followed by not enough housing for low-income households or for individuals living alone. And this kind of parodies what we saw in the data analysis as well. But generally, there was agreement that Farmington has enough housing for families with children and for Farmington's workforce. We also asked an open-ended question, what would the benefits of housing diversity be in Farmington? So housing diversity is different types of housing, not necessarily affordable housing. So we had 67% of respondents that identified at least one benefit, while 20% said there would be no benefit. So the top benefits that were identified was increased diversity of the residents, whether that's socioeconomic, cultural, racial, age, things like that. Second was enabling young people who grew up in the town to remain in town, followed by attracting new residents to the community, enabling seniors to age in place, and economic development, so having more people that will support local businesses. And with that, I will turn it back over to Pat for our case studies.
All right, so this gets us to our interactive portion of the evening. And we're really looking to get your feedback on some potential strategies. So over the next 20 minutes or so, we'll go over some case studies and different strategies and then get your input. And so we'll be using an audience polling system. So if you're joining on a web browser, we would recommend that you open a new tab and type in the URL on the screen, pollev.com/SLR2021. If you just hold on that screen for a moment, and we'll get to the later instructions. If you're joining on a phone, or if you'd like to join on the phone to keep your computer screen on the Zoom webinar, you can text SLR2021 to the number 22333. And then Liz, if you can go to the next slide. So for the folks that are joining by phone, we'll leave this on the screen here for just a moment. So you'll get a text and you will click on the polleverywhere.com link. That'll then take you to a page, and then you hit the green Get Started button. And if anyone has any trouble logging in thus far, just please either raise your hand or type in the chat. We'd be happy to help you. Liz, next page, please. All right, so once you enter, you'll have to click I'm a participant. And then the final screen is typing in SLR 2021 after the backslash on the screen. And then you can hit join, and then you'll be in our system. All right, so to get everybody acclimated with the polling system, we're gonna do a practice question. What is your favorite flavor of ice cream? So this is an open-ended response. So if you are participating, if you could just type in your answer and hit submit. And
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, Liz.
Beautiful.
All
right.
Chocolate's coming in strong. Okay, so with that, I think everybody's feeling pretty good with the program.
Regularly scheduled programming.
Yes.
Thanks, Liz. All right. So now what we're going to go through are some potential strategies. And again, this is really meant to just give you a sampling of what other communities in the state are doing, and really getting your input on whether or not you think that this could be a strategy that would work for Farmington. And most of these are going to be multiple choice, but we have a couple of different question types that we'll throw at you. So Liz, if you can go to the next slide. So first, we want to talk about accessory dwelling units, commonly known as ADUs or in-law apartments. And these are small dwellings that are located on the same property as a regular single-family home. They can either be attached to the main structure, whether it's in an addition in the back, a basement, or an attic, or in a separate detached structure. These are a really important element that a lot of folks have talked about in recent years, and these are, I think, especially popular out in the West Coast, where they're really struggling with housing affordability. And because they're smaller units, they tend to cost less than traditional housing, and they can also provide a homeowner with an additional revenue stream, thus reducing their overall housing costs. Now, these may or may not meet that definition of affordable, depending on whether they have a deed restriction or not. In some communities in Connecticut, ADUs are required to be affordable. In other towns, they are not. So today in Farmington, accessory apartments are permitted in your zoning as part of a single-family home in certain zones, subject to special requirements, including it must be attached to the main dwelling, so you cannot have a detached ADU. There's some restrictions on the size and number of bedrooms. This is a very common type of regulation that we see in most communities. A minimum lot size requirement. Today, the person living in an accessory dwelling unit must be either a family member or employed by the household for domestic services. And then there's also some unit design standards. To give you a case study of what some other towns have done, town of Mansfield has been very active at amending its ADU legislation. They're a college town, so they have some unique challenges in terms of providing housing for students while also maintaining some reasonable restrictions to protect neighborhoods. So they do permit it more broadly than Farmington with a zoning permit approval. It can be attached or detached. As long as the ADU or main dwelling is owner occupied, it can be rented to anybody. And like Farmington, they do have requirements on unit size as well as occupancy requirements. And they do require that ADUs are certified with the town planner every 5 years to make sure that they're meeting town requirements. So to just recap ADUs before we get into the questions on ADUs, many towns have been reevaluating these ADUs in recent years as an opportunity to increase the availability of small units and affordable units, while still maintaining some reasonable restrictions for things like unit size, parking, and owner occupancy requirements. If the town were to make changes to its regulations, it would require modifying the town zoning code. ADUs would only meet that state definition of affordable if the unit was deed restricted, and the state statutes require that for a period of at least 10 years for an ADU. And finally, this would require some oversight from town staff to ensure compliance with your regulations. Getting into our first batch of questions, if you can pivot back over to your Poll Everywhere screen, we're going to roll through a few statements and looking for your perceptions on whether your level of agreement with these statements. So the first question, Farmington should allow accessory dwelling units in detached structures. So again, to recap today, you're only allowed an accessory apartment if it's attached to the main unit.
And if you click the wrong button, you're allowed to change it, but you can only answer one time. So it's whatever you've hit last will be your answer.
All right, so it seems like folks are generally supportive of allowing ADUs in detached structures. You folks neutral, disagree, and strongly disagree.
Still have a couple coming in.
All right.
Okay.
Great. And what we'll do is we'll leave these open for a little bit after the session if you wanted to go back in and change your answer or answer a previous question.
Yeah. Or if you know anyone who couldn't make it tonight, they'll be able to follow the same instructions and get on here.
All right, next question. Farmington should eliminate rental restrictions on ADUs as long as either the ADU or the main dwelling is owner occupied. So today in Farmington, a property owner can only rent an ADU if it's a relative or someone employed by the household. So this would be removing that restriction.
People are submitting.
Okay.
I'll clear it. Try again. Yeah.
Thanks for bearing with us.
Took mine and moved to the next question, so.
And when it's not automatically moving, so next, if I have to get out and keep
Yeah,
reading.
no, mine moved, okay.
Yeah. I have to re-enter.
Liz, you're muted.
Thanks. Well, you missed me profusely apologizing for the technical difficulties. Okay. So it seems like we have everyone.
All right, so this one's a little more divided, about 60-40 in the folks that are in the agree category versus the disagree category.
Okay, let's try the next one. Hopefully it'll be smoother. Oh.
All right, so Next question is, Farmington should require that ADUs be deed restricted as affordable. That will allow them to count towards that state definition of affordable housing. Today, there's no restrictions on whether or not an ADU needs to be affordable or not. Looks like we're pretty split on this one. I'll give another minute or two to folks to wrap up, but just about even responses across our different categories.
Mine does when she does it, so.
So definitely skewing a little bit towards the negative here. Okay. All right, so the next topic we'll talk about is what's called inclusionary zoning. And this either incentivizes or requires new development to set aside a percentage of units as affordable. This can be used for both single family or multifamily developments. So Farmington does have 2 inclusionary zones that require a percentage of units to be designated as affordable. A lot of the mixed income projects that I showed you earlier are within these 2 zones. And these aren't just restricted to multifamily. These zones do allow single family duplexes as well as multifamily. And these again would be restricted to households making less than 80% of area median income, typically through a deed restriction. So Liz, if you can go to the next slide, please. So Darien has taken a little bit more of a broad approach in that it requires a set aside of 12% for any multifamily development of 2 or more units across all zones, or any single family subdivision greater than 5 or more building lots. And it requires that 12% of those units be designated as affordable, and that would be protected affordable units. However, it also has an incentive where if a development has 25% of units as affordable housing, then they get increases in allowable density. They can build higher buildings and larger buildings with some reduced setback requirements. So it shows kind of both approaches of the requirement as well as the incentive. And these are kind of the 2 main ways the towns adopt inclusionary zoning. So takeaways here. So this can apply to either all zones or specific zones. Again, that's a set aside of affordable housing units. Today, it's only tied to those 2 specific zones in Farmington. Those 2 approaches are either requiring a percentage, or incentivizing by giving density bonuses. The town can determine the percentage of units that are required to be affordable. It can also determine, for example, whether or not they are affordable to those making 80% of area median income, or perhaps even 60 or 50% of area median income. These can be used in tandem with an affordable housing trust fund, which I'll get to in a little bit. And again, this would require some level of town oversight to ensure compliance to the zoning regulations. All right, so the next question would be, Farmington should consider inclusionary zoning in single family zones. So this would mean if you had a single family development, a new single family development over a certain size, they'd be required to set aside a certain percentage of units as affordable. All right, so we're fairly split on this one, evenly split between the disagrees and the agrees.
Okay.
Next question, Farmington should consider inclusionary zoning in multifamily zones. So again, this would apply to any multifamily development. So today it's only within those 2 special zones. And again, that would be a set aside of a percentage of units as affordable. Minute here, so definitely seems like a little bit more support than the single family. Trending towards the agree, strongly agree, although we still have a somewhat of a sizable number of disagrees or neutrals.
Okay, I think we've leveled out.
All right, next would be the incentive-based approach. So Farmington should consider zoning incentives such as an increase in allowable density for developments that include a percentage of affordable housing. Again, this wouldn't be required, but rather a developer would get a bonus for meeting those requirements. All right, so this is definitely trending towards the disagree.
Yeah, and I just wanted to clarify, when we say density, it could be the size of the building rather than how many people live in the building, that kind of thing. It's the dimensions of the building, not the amount of people who live in it, just to make that clear. All right.
Definitely trending negative on this one. All right, so this is going to be a little bit of a different type of question. So if inclusionary zoning is used in Farmington, what percentage of units should be required to be affordable? So this is a sliding scale bar, and if you just click on the image on the percentage you think should be required to be affordable, and you'll notice that all of these pull up on the screen. We have quite a few folks in the 10%, some less, a couple folks in the 30 to 40% range, one at 0. Okay, so we seem to be kind of split between the 10% or less and 25 to 40%.
Okay.
All right, so the next strategy we want to talk about are affordable housing trust funds. So many municipalities in Connecticut have established these trust funds to construct, rehabilitate, repair, or maintain affordable housing units. These funds are typically outside of the traditional town budget process. And so there are two ways that these funds are commonly funded. The first is a payment in lieu. So this is when you have an inclusionary zone where you're required to have a certain percentage of units as affordable. A developer has an option to pay into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund in lieu of building those affordable units. The second strategy is what's called an inclusionary zoning fee. And this is a fee that would be charged on all new construction or building additions based on the value of the improvements. And this would be similar to a building fee that the town collects on new construction. So to give you case studies of how affordable housing trust funds are used in other towns, Bethel has a payment in lieu of approach. So they require, I believe it's a 20% set aside of affordable housing in 2 zones. And developers either have to meet that 20% requirement or they pay into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund for the units that they don't build up to that 20%. And that fee is determined by the housing administrator. And they've had several projects that have paid in lieu into the Housing Trust Fund, and then the town is able to spend that money on its priority projects. Second type of approach is the inclusionary zoning fee approach. This is a case study from the town of New Canaan, where any zoning permit for either new construction or an exterior addition in any zone gets charged an inclusionary zoning fee of 1% of the construction value, which then goes into the Housing Trust Fund to support construction, rehabilitation, or repair of affordable housing units. The town of Fairfield also has an inclusionary zoning fee of 0.5%. Again, and both of these mechanisms have allowed those towns to raise a quite sizable amount of money to then fund the town's affordable housing priorities. So to sum up trust funds, this is a mechanism to raise funds to support affordable housing, typically through payments in lieu or zoning fees. So again, outside of the typical town budget process. One of the benefits is that it then allows the town to spend that money on its affordable housing priorities, not on that of a specific developer. It's flexible. State statutes allow towns to spend that money on a range of different projects that support affordable housing, including new construction, repair, land acquisition, purchasing deed restrictions, as well as program administration and oversight. This would require a little bit more effort than just simply changing the zoning regulations like some of the strategies we talked about previously. There would need to be a commitment by the town to have staff oversight and administration of this program, and typically expenditures from that trust fund are overseen by your town council or a board of selectmen, oftentimes in conjunction with an affordable housing committee or housing committee that plays an advisory role. All right, so getting into our next set of interactive questions. Farmington should consider a payment in lieu of option for developers who don't meet the town's affordability requirements. A minute or two to let the results trickle in. So again, this would give the developer the option to pay the town via the Housing Trust Fund if it didn't build the required percentage of affordable units. So far, it looks like we're skewing a little bit towards the negative. Sizable number of folks in the neutral category, some folks in the agree.
Okay. Oh, we got a couple more.
All right, yeah, we'll give another couple seconds here.
Don't be shy, even if you're neutral.
All right, so we're a little more evenly split now that we have more folks in. About 40% agree, 30% neutral, 30% strongly disagree. Okay. All right, next approach would be Farmington should consider an inclusionary zoning fee on all new construction. So while the first one would only, the payment in lieu would only be for new development that had an affordable housing set-aside requirement, the inclusionary zoning fee would apply to all new construction, regardless of whether it has affordable requirements or not. This one is skewing a little bit more towards the disagree side, a little more than half either disagree or strongly disagree. We have about just under 20% in the neutral and just under 30% in the agree. It looks like that's about everybody. We're averaging
Okay.
about 11 per question. So.
All right.
All right. So next question is, if the town did create an affordable housing trust fund, which types of projects should be prioritized? The creation of new affordable units, maintenance and repair of existing units, or unit preservation, which would be the purchase of deed restrictions. And when we were in the needs analysis section, we had mentioned that Farmington has quite a number of units where the deed restrictions are expiring. This could potentially be a tool used to keep those on the books as affordable. So this is a ranking question. So it'll work a little bit different than the other ones. You'll notice on your screen when you click on one of the three rectangles, you'll get either an up or down arrow. So you can move the most favorable responses to the top and the least favorable priorities to the bottom. And then once you're done, click submit. All right, so far it looks like maintenance and repair first, creation of new affordable units second, and unit preservation third. Give another couple of seconds for the last folks.
Mm-hmm. All right.
All right, great. So another strategy is leveraging municipal land. So this can be used either in tandem with a housing authority, like the Farmington Housing Authority, or with a not-for-profit developer specializing in affordable housing, essentially using town lands to develop new affordable housing units. On to Liz. So I'll pass it over to Nancy quickly to talk about one of the programs that the town has where they're actually using town land to support the cooperative homeownership program. So turn it over to you, Nancy.
Okay, thank you. As I mentioned earlier, one of the programmatic programs that we supervise is called the Cooperative Home Ownership Program, and that is where the town purchases the land and allows the homeowner to purchase the house. And by buying the land out from under it, it makes the house more costly, less costly rather, much more affordable. And in the restrictions, they need to sell it to another person who would be considered an affordable buyer. So it then maintains that property in the program, and it will always be sold to someone who meets the criteria. So there's one way to use that town-owned land to be able to encourage people to move into town and making it more affordable.
Great. Thanks, Nancy. So another approach that the town of Guilford has recently taken is looking at an underutilized municipal parcel and then partnering with a not-for-profit housing developer. So this is a property very close to the Guilford train station, also very close to the downtown. The town obtained a grant to conduct a site feasibility study, as well as do some public outreach to determine the size and scale of the development. There is some natural constraints on the site. And actually pretty recently, I believe it was within the last couple of weeks, the town held a town meeting where residents voted in favor of conveying the land to a not-for-profit housing developer who will then build affordable housing units. So some takeaways on this potential strategy. This can include either the reuse of an existing town property, like we saw in the Guilford example, or the purchase of new land, like you do for the cooperative home ownership program. Again, this is typically a strategy done in partnership with a not-for-profit housing developer or a local housing authority. This is, again, something that can be used in tandem with an affordable housing trust fund if one is established. That money in the trust fund can be used to purchase new land. And then again, this would require oversight by town council and town staff. All right, so next question. Farmington should expand the cooperative home ownership program. This would entail buying new units. So currently the town has about 30 that are purchased through this program. So that would expand that. So we're trending towards the agree side, about 60% so far in the agree or strongly agree, about 30% in the disagree category, and about 10% in the neutral. All right, next would be the town acquiring additional land to support the cooperative home ownership program. This will be a more proactive approach beyond just buying the land from a prospective home buyer. This one's trending a little more towards our two poles. So far, half, a little more than half in the strongly disagree, the other 40 or some odd percent in the strongly agree. Give another couple seconds here for the last few folks. All right, pretty evenly split on this one.
Okay.
All right, so this is our last question for our interactive session for the evening. And this is another ranking question. And this is basically going over all of those potential strategies that we discussed tonight, knowing that the town isn't going to implement, 15 different strategies, but really going to be focusing on a handful that can, align the best with community values and priorities. So we're going to ask you to order these with the most appropriate on the top and the least appropriate on the bottom. And again, this is a ranking question. So if you click on your screen, you'll get a little up arrow or down arrow to move them up or down. Once you have them in the correct order, then hit submit response. And if you want to go back and redo anything, you can just hit clear response and that'll reset everything for you.
There's a lot of clicking, so it may take a minute.
All right, so far, cooperative home ownership program first, reducing restrictions on ADUs. I've now tied with inclusionary zoning for multifamily development. Second, that one just got bumped up to second now. Restrictions for ADUs coming in last so far. Another.
The slowest version of the Kentucky Derby.
All right, so So we got 10 responses. I think that's about what we've been getting. So top ranked one was expand the cooperative home ownership program. Second, considering inclusionary zoning for multifamily developments over 10 units. And actually that's tied for first now. We got our final, we've been getting 11 as our max. So reducing restrictions on ADUs came in third. Establishing an affordable housing trust fund with payment in lieu in fourth. Inclusionary zoning for single family, deed restrictions on ADUs, and inclusionary zoning fee kind of winding out the bottom here in 5th, 6th, and 7th. So.
And again, this question will remain open, so if you want to make changes or have other people answer it, it should be open for about a day.
Right.
So thank you, everyone. That concludes the kind of history introduction as far as affordable housing in Farmington, this planning process, how we are, starting to get this going. And we really appreciate all of you taking the time this evening to dial in and provide us your input via our questions. I think there's a lot of really interesting information that's coming through here that we can utilize to help us develop our value statement and focus on some strategies that really fit the values and needs of Farmington. So I hope you all will stay informed on this affordable housing plan. We have our Story Map website up on the web, which hosted our survey, which we previously conducted, and we'll continue to add information to that. And I am happy to take any comments or concerns, questions to my email, kramerk@farmington-ct.org, and that remains open. So do we have any questions at this point in time that we would like to quickly clarify? I know we have hit our just on time at 7:59, so way to go, team.
No, the only question that's popping is that there were questions about how many people were on the call, and that given the limited number that were able to participate live, that the results aren't necessarily statistically significant, which we certainly recognize and understand. And I know there was a comment about the survey will be left open for how, I didn't catch how long we can leave this open for.
So we'll leave it open till tomorrow. I think it really benefits the attendees tonight because they were able to kind of get that context. However, once we close it, if folks have comments on any potential strategies that they either strongly support or strongly don't support, those can be emailed to Catherine.
Gotcha. Perfect. Yeah, because I think we want to figure out an opportunity to get some additional feedback regarding this. So
we will continue to work on that. So, and thanks, Liz. She just posted our Story Map website in the chat function for all of you.
Do we have a question and answer round too?
Yeah, it was just about the number of participants that we've had and the limited data that we were able to capture this evening. So on that note, I will thank you all for participating and have a great night.